JPA will be used in the project development. Let's understand. Application will be developed using layered architecture. Application contains several layers. So to develop the application, we will be having presentation layer. So to develop the presentation layer, earlier we used to work with JSP. Then after TimeLeaf came into picture. Then after people are going with Angular and React.js, and nowadays Vue.js also is available like this. There are several technologies are available to develop presentation layer of the application. The presentation layer represents user interface in the project. Then after, in the project, we need to develop web layer. So web layer basically is responsible to deal with request and response. Earlier, people used to develop this web layer by using servlets. Later point of time, people used Struts framework. Now, people are using Spring Web MVC module to develop web layer in the application. Presentation layer will be available. Presentation layer contains a user interface. To develop the presentation layer, we will go for JSP and TimeLeaf, Angular, React, Vue. Any one thing we can use to develop the presentation layer of the project. Currently in the market, Angular, React, Vue, these things are having the demand to develop the presentation layer. This is JSP and TimeLeaf are outdated in the market. Now, next one, in the project, web layer will be available. When user performs some operation in the presentation layer, then that request will go to web layer. A servlet will execute. That servlet will capture data from the form and will do some operations and will send the response to the client. That is called as a web layer. To develop the web layer, earlier Java people used it to work with servlets. Then later we used Struts framework to develop that. Then later we used Spring Web MVC. Currently people are going with this Spring Web MVC to develop this web layer. All right. Next, along with this web layer, we need to have persistence layer also in the project. So every project will have database operations to perform storage, storing, retrieving, updating, deleting. So to perform the operations with the database, so in our project, some classes will be available. Those classes are belongs to persistence layer. Earlier, people used it to work with JDBC to develop that persistence layer. After that, Spring JDBC came into market. Then Spring ORM came into picture. Now people are going with a Spring Data JPA to develop persistence layer. Persistence layer is nothing but the layer which contains the classes which are responsible to communicate with the database. Those classes are called as persistence layer classes. JDBC is one API given by Sun Microsystem to develop the persistence layer. To overcome the problems of the JDBC, Spring people provided Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC developed on top of the JDBC API. And to support ORM features representing the data in the form of objects, people used this Spring ORM. Now, on top of the Spring ORM, this Spring Data JPA came into picture. So this Spring Data JPA, we are going to use to develop only persistence layer. Okay, Spring Data JPA is used to develop persistence layer of the application. Spring Data JPA is used to develop persistence layer in the application. So what is the meaning of persistence layer? The logic which is responsible to communicate with the database is called as persistence logic. We will develop the persistent logic classes inside the persistence layer. So what are the advantages of going with the Spring Data JPA? If you go for JDBC, we know that some common lines of code we need to write in every method: getting the connection, creating the statement, executing the query, closing the connection. All that stuff we need to do manually when we go for JDBC. To avoid that problem, Spring JDBC came into picture. By using Spring JDBC, we can directly execute the query. Connection creation, driver loading, connection closing, everything will be taken care by Spring JDBC. If you want to represent your data in the form of objects, then you can go for Hibernate, Spring ORM, frameworks are available. Now, Even if you go for the Hibernate, you need to write some logic to perform operations in the database. Here, on top of the Hibernate, this Spring Data JPA came into picture. Spring Data JPA is used to develop persistence layer in the application. Spring Data JPA providing ready-made methods to perform CRUD operations in the database. Okay, you no need to write your own logic to insert, update, delete the data, because Spring Data JPA providing ready-made methods to perform CRUD operations in tables, in DB tables. Sir, what is the meaning of ready-made methods to perform CRUD operations? When you go for the Spring Data JPA, they will provide you one interface. Okay, you need to extend the properties from the interface, and you need to call the methods which are provided by Data JPA. If you want to insert a record, you no need to write any logic. You just call the method which is provided by Data JPA to insert the record. If you want to update a record, or if you want to delete a record, if you want to retrieve the record. So for every operation that you want to do in the table, CRUD operations, Data JPA provided ready-made methods. In the Hibernate also, we need to write some logic like insert the record by using save method and open the transactions, manage the session factories and the sessions that we need to do in the Hibernate. But when it comes to the Data JPA, ready-made methods are available to perform CRUD operations in the database tables. Spring Data JPA providing ready-made methods to perform CRUD operations in the database tables. Now here, Spring Data JPA providing two interfaces, guys. One is called as CRUD repository interface. One is called as CRUD repository interface. And the second one is JPA repository interface. When we go for Spring Data JPA, we have a CRUD repository interface and we have the JPA repository interface. So here, CRUD repository will provide you normal methods to perform the CRUD operations. So whatever the methods available in the CRUD repository, same methods available in the JPA repository also. And we are having some additional methods to perform sorting, to perform pagination. So these methods are available in the JPA repository. So what we can say is JPA repository is equal to CRUD repository plus JPA repository is equal to CRUD repository plus pagination methods plus sorting methods. So whatever the methods which are available in the CRUD repository, all those methods are available in the JPA repository also. And along with that, we are having additional methods to perform the pagination. I want to retrieve records page by page. First page 10 records, second page 10 records. Like this, if you go to Google, you can see the pagination. When you search something in the Google, Google will not give you all the records in the single shot. So if you observe, let me go to Google and let me type something in the Google. Okay, I'm going to type Spring Boot interview questions. When I type Spring Boot interview questions, Google is giving me some links here. And below the page, you can see numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 like this. These are called as pagination numbers, page numbers. First page, it is giving some information. And when you click on this, you will go to the second page. In the second page, we are getting few more records. When you go for third page, you are getting few more records. Like this, multiple records are coming. Multiple pages are coming here. So to perform this pagination, the JPA repository provided ready-made methods. And to sort the data, I want to sort the records based on the price, or I want to sort the record based on the age, customer age. Okay, based on the customer data, I want to sort the record. Okay, so to perform the sorting, we are going to use several methods available. Pagination methods are available and sorting methods are available when we go for this CRUD repository and JPA repository. Okay, so in the Data JPA, we are having two methods, two interfaces are available. JPA providing ready-made methods to perform CRUD operations in the database tables. JPA mainly providing below JPA methods, Data JPA methods are available in the below interfaces. Data JPA providing ready-made methods with the below interfaces. What are those interfaces available? One is CRUD repository interface. Another one is the JPA repository. JPA repository is equal to CRUD repository plus pagination method plus sorting methods are available. So as a Java programmer, if you want to develop our application with the persistence layer, we can use the data JPA. When we use the data JPA, it will provide the interfaces for us. So we need to extend the properties from these interfaces. These interfaces will provide the ready-made methods to perform operations with the database. Okay. Now, when we are working with this data JPA, we need to understand some terminology. Spring Data JPA terminology. Spring Data JPA terminology. Okay. What is the terminology that we need to follow when we are working with this persistence logic? Right. The first thing is we need to focus on data source object. The first thing is data source object. Data source object, it represents connection with the database. It represents connection with the database. So we need to establish data source to communicate with the database. Your application want to communicate with the database. With which database you want to communicate, that will be represented by using this data source. So now we are creating the projects, right? As we discussed in the last session, properties file will be available and YML file will be available. With which database we want to communicate, that database properties we are going to configure in the data source object. Data source properties. With which database we want to communicate, those properties we need to specify in the application.properties file or in the application.yml. Data source properties we can configure by using application. We can configure in application.properties or application.yml. Application.properties or application.yml. With which database you want to communicate, that database properties you need to configure by using this data source object. And the second thing is we need to create entity class. So what is entity class? The Java class which is representing the database table, that class is the entity class. Entity class, the class which is mapped with the database table. The class which is mapped with the database table is called as a entity class. Now, for example, if I am taking one student class in the table, student table in the database, for that student class, how we are going to write the entity class? Assume that this is my student table. This is my student table. In this student table, I'm having three columns: student ID, which is a primary key, and I'm having student name, and I'm having student rank, student gender. Like this. Like this, I'm having a table in the database. My table is having 4 columns. In those 4 columns, one column I represented as a primary key column. So like this, I have a table. Now in this table, I want to perform some operations by using data JPA. So first of all, where is this table is available? In which database this table is available? That a database properties we need to configure in the project by using data source object. So data source represents with which database we want to communicate. So do you want to communicate with the Oracle database or do you want to communicate with MySQL database? The data source properties we are going to configure in application.properties file or application.yml file. Anything is fine. We already know the differences between properties file and YML file also. And the next one is entity class. So the class which is mapped with the database table is called as an entity class. Suppose, for example, this is my table. So how we are going to write a class to map with this table? I'm going to create one class with a name called class student. Inside this class, some properties: integer student ID and integer string student name is available, and long rank is available. Long rank is available, and string gender is available. So this is my Java class. This is Java class. I want to map with the database table. So as of now, it is a normal Java class. As of now, it is a normal Java class only. This is Java class I want to map with a table to perform the operations, cloud operations. First of all, to represent this class as an entity class, we will be writing one annotation called @entity. And I want to map this class with a table. For that, we will give @table annotation. Name is equal to with which table you want to map. I want to map this with the student table. Okay. Entity We'll represent this class as an entity class. Table to map our Java class with the database table. Writing the table annotation is optional. If you don't write the table annotation, it will consider class name as a table name. It will consider the class name as a table name. So at the rate entity annotation is available and at the rate table annotation is available. Table name is equal to student table. All right. Now here I'm having a variable. This variable I want to represent as a primary key. So to represent the variable as a primary key, we will be using at the rate ID annotation. And I want to map this variable with the column name. To map the variable with the column name, we will be using column annotation. Column name is equal to student ID. If your column name and variable names are same, then writing this column annotation is also optional. Writing the column annotation is also optional. If your database table variable name and by entity class variable names are same, column name and variable name same means column annotation is not required. Otherwise, we need to write this column annotation. Student ID, student name, and student rank. Like this. We are going to represent our Java class with the database table structure. The class which is mapping with the database table, that class is called as a entity class. How to represent Java class as an entity class? To represent the Java class as an entity class, we are having several annotations. We are having several annotations. Are you guys getting my point? So here also I'm writing at the rate column. Column name is equal to student gender. Column name is equal to student gender. Like this, we are taking several annotations. Are you guys clear with my point? So what is an entity class? The Java class, which is mapped with the database table, is called as a entity class. When we are working with any ORM framework, these entity classes are going to play very important role. My class is mapped with the table. Class to table mapping will be available. If a class name and table names are same, then writing at the rate table annotation is optional. If a class name and table names are matching, then writing at the rate table annotation is optional. Now, my variable is mapped with the column name. So as I want to map a variable name with the column name, I will be using at the rate column annotation. If column name and variable name, if database table column name, Java class variable names are same, then writing column annotation is also optional. At the rate ID will represent it is mapped to primary key column in the database. And the name is mapped to student name column. So here class is mapped to table, variables are mapped to columns. So this is called as ORM mapping, object relational mappings. Okay, my Java object will represent a row in the table. So if I create an object for the student now, student object will represent one row in the database table. Like this, we are going to do ORM mapping. Okay, guys. Right. Now here, class name is available and the table name is available. Class name will be referred to the table name by using at the rate table annotation. Suppose, for example, your class name and table names are same in the database, then writing at the rate table is optional. Okay. So how column name will be mapped with variable name at the rate column annotation. If the variable name and column names are same, writing at the rate column is also optional. At the rate ID annotation, we are going to write to represent that this column is mapped to primary key column. So like this, when we are working with the data JPA, we need to create the entity class. So when we are working with the entity class, we will be using at the rate entity annotation. We will be using at the rate table, at the rate ID, at the rate column. So these are most commonly used annotations when we are creating entity classes. Data source object, data source properties, entity class. So data source will represent with which database we want to communicate. That data source properties we can configure in application.properties or we can configure in application.yml. We can configure that in the application.properties file or we can configure them in the application.yml file. Entity class. The class which is mapped with the database table is called as entity class. By using these annotations, we can map our Java class with the database table. And the third concept in the data JPA is repository interface. Repository interface. Okay. To perform operations with the database table, for every database table, one repository will be created. Repository interface. Okay. For every table, For every table, we will create one repository. For every table, we will create one repository interface. For every table, we will create one repository interface to perform CRUD operations. Now, how we are going to create that repository interface? For example, I want to perform operations with the student table. Now, public interface student repository. Public interface student repository extends from CRUD repository. CRUD repository is a predefined repository provided by database, entity, and ID type we are going to specify. If you want to perform operations with the student table is mapped to student entity. That student entity we will supply, and what is the primary key of the student table, that data type we will specify, and we are going to create one repository interface here. What is the purpose of this repository interface? Here, I am extending the properties from CRUD repository. As I mentioned, JPA is providing two types of repositories. One is called as CRUD repository. Second one is called as JPA repository. If you want to perform only CRUD operations, then you can extend the properties from CRUD repository. Along with the CRUD operations, if you want to perform the pagination, implementation, and sorting implementation in the project, then it's better to extend the properties from JPA repository. So whenever our interface is extending the properties from the JPA repository, internally, JPA will provide the implementation for our repository in the runtime by using proxy. So what are the methods available in the CRUD repository? All those methods we can access by using our repository. So what are the methods available? The common methods which are required, like inserting the record, updating the record, deleting the record, okay, retrieving the record, whatever the common operations that we need to perform for multiple, what are the common operations that we need to perform in our table, that common operational methods we can access by using this CRUD repository or JPA repository. So you no need to write any logic. You no need to write any logic to perform operations in the database table. Suppose if you want to insert the record, or if you want to update the record, or if you want to delete the record, you no need to write the methods, because CRUD repository already providing the methods for you. You just need to extend the properties from their repository. That's it. Now, by using this repository implementation class object, we can perform the CRUD operations in the table. So with the student interface, by using student repository, we can perform CRUD operations in student table. Okay, guys. Now here, student repository is taking student entity. Whatever the student entity we are creating, right? The student entity we are going to pass as input for the repository. Student entity having student ID as a primary key. Student ID is an integer. We can supply integer as a type of the ID, and this repository should perform, the student repository should perform operations with which table. So student repository should perform operations with the student table. Student table is mapped to which entity class? That entity class will provide as an input for student repository. So like this, we need to create a repository interface to perform operations with the database table. Entity class will be available. The Java class which is mapped to database table, that class is called as a entity class. So to represent Java class as an entity, these annotations will be available. Once entity class is created, to perform the operations with the table, we will go for repository. So how to create a repository? We are going to create a dummy repository by extending the properties from CRUD repository or JPA repository. So this repository will provide the methods. We can call the methods to perform our CRUD operations. How this repository will understand in which table it has to perform the operations. This repository will be having the entity reference. This entity will be having table reference. So repository will be talking to entity. Entity will be mapped to database table. So here I'm going to create one repository. For example, student repository. For student repository, I will be specifying the entity class, the student entity, and the integer. Integer is nothing but it is the data type of the primary key. Integer is a data type of the primary key. So this is my student repository. My student repository will be extending the properties from CRUD repository or JPA repository. CRUD repository and JPA repository provided by data JPA itself. They are predefined repositories. They are having the methods. When our repository want to perform the operations, now our repository will point to that, extend the properties from that and referring to the entity. Now, so here, when you go for the student repository, it will provide you methods to save the record, delete the record, right? Get the records, find by ID, find by name, find by ID, find all, count methods, count method. Like that, there are several methods will be provided by CRUD repository, which are used to perform CRUD operations. You no need to write your own logic to insert the data, update the data, or retrieve the data, because your interface is already extending from the CRUD repository. CRUD repository will provide you ready-made methods to perform the operation. That means by using this single repository interface, I can perform CRUD operations in the table without writing single line of code. I just need to create one repository by extending the properties from that. That's it. I no need to write the logic for that. I no need to write the logic for that. Are you guys getting my point? I no need to write the logic for that. That logic will be provided by JPA in the runtime. Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? So, are you able to understand what I am explaining? JPA terminology. First one is a data source. Data source will represent which database you want to communicate. Okay. Data source object. Data source properties. It represents database connection. It represents database connections. Data source object. It is representing data source connection. The next one is entity. It is mapped with database table, repository. So for table, we will create for one table. For every table, we will create one repository interface to perform our CRUD operations. For every table, we will create one repository interface to perform CRUD operations. All right. So by using this repository, we can perform CRUD operations in the student table. And the fourth important thing is repository methods. The fourth important thing is repository methods. Okay. So ready-made methods available. Ready-made methods provided by JPA. Ready-made methods provided by data JPA to perform CRUD operations. So if you want to perform the CRUD operations in your table, you no need to write the logic because methods are already available. Okay, guys. Now here, when our interface is extending the properties from CRUD repository node, for our repository interface, implementation will be provided in the runtime, using proxy class. Okay. For our interface, they will create the implementation. You no need to create the implementation also. You just need to create the interface by extending from CRUD repository. For our repository interface, implementation will be provided in the runtime using proxy class. You no need to provide that implementation also. You just create the repository by extending the properties and you call the methods which are provided by that interface. Now, can I say my repository is the child interface for the CRUD repository? Come on, guys. Can I say student repository is acting as a child interface for the CRUD repository? Yes, we can say student repository is acting as a child interface for the CRUD repository. Student repository acting as a child interface for the CRUD repository. When student repository acting as a child interface for the CRUD repository, whatever the methods available in the CRUD repository, can we access those methods in the student repository? Can we access those methods in the student repository? Yes, we can access that. So now, when I'm accessing a method by using student repository, how this repository will understand in which table it has to insert the record. For example, I'm using student repository and I'm asking student repository to insert a record. when I ask student repository to insert a record, how this student repository will understand in which table it has to insert the record? How the student repository will understand in which table it has to insert the record? How the repository will know with which table it has to communicate? Based on the entity. So where we are giving the entity, whenever we are extending the properties from CRUD repository, we are telling the student class. That student class is mapped to student table. We are giving the student class as the information. That means this student repository belongs to student entity. That student entity belongs to table. So how the repository will know that with which table it has to perform the operation? Because the repository will be pointing to entity. Entity will be pointing to table. How entity will understand that is mapped to which table? How entity, is there any mapping between the entity and the table, guys? Do we have any mapping between the entity and the table? Come on. Do we have any mapping between entity and the table? Do we have any mapping between the entity and the table? Yes. How we are mapping entity and the table? By using annotations. Okay. Now, when I call the save method by using repository, so repository is understanding that this repository belongs to entity. Entity is understanding that it belongs to this table. Are you able to understand the relation now? We are calling repository method. Repository will understand the table by using entity. Entity is already mapped to table by using table annotation. Entity is already mapped to table by using table annotation. Are you clear? Perfect. So now, when I am creating an interface like this by extending from CRUD repository, do I need to write the methods to perform the CRUD operations, or I can use the methods provided by CRUD repository? Do we need to develop our own methods for the CRUD operations, or we can use the methods provided by data.jpa? Do we need to write our own methods, or we need to use the methods given by data.jpa? Guys, come on. Do we need to use our methods, or we can use the methods given by data.jpa? We can use the methods given by data.jpa. We no need to write those methods also. Okay. So what are the methods provided by data.jpa? Guys, see here, first one, if you want to insert a record, there is a method called save method. It will take entity object as a parameter. Save method is available. It will take entity object as a parameter. Save method is available. It will be taking entity object as a parameter. Suppose if you want to save multiple records, then iterable it is expecting as entities. Okay, guys. Iterable object it is expecting. If you want to save single record in the database table, then you can go for save method. If you want to save multiple records at a time in the table, then you can go for save all method. Save and save all for same purpose. But the difference is, if you want to insert a single record, we can go for save method. If you want to insert multiple records at a time, then you will be going for save all method. Okay. Save and save all. Now here, to update the record, we don't have any methods, guys. Save method, save all method are called as polymorphic methods. Whatever the entity you pass, in that entity, if the primary key is available, that primary key it will check. If the record is available with the primary key, save method will update the record. So here, save and save all methods are called as upsert methods. Above two methods are called as upsert methods. Above two methods are called as upsert methods. That means those methods will be used for updating as well as for inserting also. Okay. So if you want to update the record or if you want to insert the record, you can go for save and save all. Save method is used to insert a single record. Save all method is used to insert multiple records at a time. And these methods are working as upsert methods. What is the meaning of upsert? Update, insert. That is called upsert. So whatever the entity we are passing, student object having primary key as 1. With the primary key 1, already record available in the table. Then save method will update the record. With the given primary key 1, record is not available. Then it will insert. That means save method first will execute the select query to check with the given data record is available or not. With the given data, if the record is already available, then it will find the update query to the database, right? So with the given data, if the record is not available, then it is going to fire the insert query to the database. As these methods are doing update operation and insert operation, these methods are called as upsert methods. These methods are called as upsert methods. Are you guys able to understand what is the purpose of upsert? What is the meaning of upsert? Come on, guys. Update plus insert is called as upsert. So do we have separate method for updating, or we need to use the save method as a update method? We need to use the save method as a update method. So when it will insert the when it will execute the insert query, when it will execute the update query, when it will execute the insert query, and when it will execute the update query. With the given data, if the record is already available, then update. If the given data, if the record is not available, then insert. That means first they will fetch the record, then they will decide whether to execute insert or update. Next one. To retrieve the record, we have a method called find by ID. So find by ID will take primary key. It is used to retrieve the record based on the given primary key. Okay. So if you have a record in the database, if you want to retrieve that record from the database by using a primary key, then you can go for find by ID method. You don't need to write the logic. You just pass the primary key by calling this method. Then it is going to retrieve that record. Find by ID. Suppose I want to retrieve multiple records by using ID. Find all by ID. Find all by ID. Iterable of ID we can supply as a parameter. IDs. I want to retrieve the record whose ID is 100. Then I will go for find by ID. I want to retrieve the records whose IDs are 100, 101, 102, 103. Three primary keys I want to pass. All the three primary key records I want to retrieve. Then I will go for find all by ID. So to retrieve a single record based on the primary key, we can go for find by ID. To retrieve multiple records based on the given primary keys, we can go for find all by ID. Suppose I want to retrieve all the records available in the table. Then I will go for a method called find all method. If you want to retrieve all the records available in the table, then we will go for find all method. So find all is used to retrieve all the records available in the table. Find all by ID to retrieve the records based on the given IDs, primary keys. To retrieve a record with a single primary key, find by ID. To insert more than one record at a time, save all method. To insert a single record, save method. I want to update single record, save method. I want to update multiple records at a time, save all method. Save and save methods are called as upsert methods. Upsert methods nothing but update plus insert. So based on the given data, they will decide whether to insert the record or whether to update the record. So these all are ready-made methods. Now similarly, I want to check that how many records available in the table. Count method. I want to know number of records, total count of the table. How many records available in the table I want to understand. To know the count of the records, we will go for count method. I want to check record is present in the database or not. Exist by ID. Exists by ID. Okay. So based on the given primary key, I want to verify the presence of the record. If the record is presented, it will give true. If the record is not presented, it will give false. If the record is presented, it will give true. If the record is not presented, it will give false value. Are you guys getting my point? Are you guys getting my point? Find by ID, find all by ID, find all method, count method, exist by ID method. Save method is used to save the record. Save all method is used to save multiple records. Above two methods are called as upsert methods. And find by ID method is used to retrieve the record based on the given ID. Find all by ID is used to retrieve multiple records based on the given IDs. Find all method is used to retrieve all the records. Count method is used to count the total size of the table. Exist by ID to check the presence of the record. Similarly, we have a method called delete by ID. If I want to delete one record from the table based on the primary key, then we can go for a method called delete by ID. Now, delete all by IDs. I will give multiple IDs and I want to delete them. Then I will go for delete all by ID. Multiple IDs I can supply as the input by using iterable. Okay. Now I have a method called delete all method. I want to delete all the records in single shot. Then I will go for delete all method. Delete by ID, delete all by ID, delete all. Like that, there are several methods available in this JPA, repositories, CRUD repository. These all are the CRUD repository methods. When we go for JPA repository, all these methods will be available and some additional methods also will be available to perform pagination and sorting. All these methods will be available and some additional methods also will be available to perform pagination and sorting. Repository methods. So ready-made methods provided by data JPA to perform the CRUD operations. You don't need to write the logic for them, guys. These are already implemented by JPA. You just call them. That's it. We are creating the repository interface, right? Our repository interface will be extending the properties from the CRUD repository or JPA repository. So our repository will become child interface for this interface. Our child interface can access all the methods of parent interface. So these methods are already implemented, right? We just need to call student repository.save. Student record will be inserted to student table. How repository will understand the table name? Repository is talking to entity class. Entity class is mapped to table name. So like this, we can use data JPA to perform CRUD operations with the tables. Let's understand. So what is data JPA? Spring Data JPA is used to develop persistence layer in the application. Spring Data JPA providing ready-made methods to perform CRUD operations in the tables. Data JPA providing ready-made methods with interfaces like below. Using interfaces like below. What are the interfaces? CRUD repository is one famous interface to perform CRUD operations. JPA repository is one famous interface. JPA repository is extending from the CRUD repository. JPA repository means CRUD repository plus pagination plus sorting methods available. Now, Spring Data JPA terminology. Data source object. It represents database connections, right? With which database we want to communicate. That information we are going to configure by using this data source. Okay. Data source properties we can configure in application.properties or application.yml. Entity class. The class which is mapped with the database table, that is called as an entity class. Entity, table, ID, column. These are called as entity classes. Next one is repository interface. For every table, one repository interface will be created to perform the CRUD operations. Like this, we are going to create repository interface, which is extending the properties from CRUD repository. That means what are the methods available in the CRUD repository? Those methods we can access by using student repository. Every repository will point to entity class. Entity class means what? The class which is mapped to table. Entity, table, ID, column. Entity, make your class as entity class. Table is optional. If your class name and table name are same, then no need to write the table. ID will represent primary key. Column. If our variable name and column names are same, column annotation is not required. Repository interfaces. Now, so whenever you extend the properties from the repository interface, then for our repository interface, implementation will be provided in the runtime using proxy class. For our repository interface, data JPA will provide the implementation class in the runtime by using proxy. You no need to write the implementation classes here. Are you guys getting my point? Implementation classes will be provided by JPA in the runtime. Then, sir, by using data JPA, we are going to create the repository. Then how to perform the operations? To perform the operations, JPA provided ready-made methods. Save method available, save all method available, find by ID available, find all by ID available, find all is available, count method available, exist by ID, delete by ID, delete all by ID, delete all. Like that, there are several methods available in the JPA. So these are ready-made methods. We no need to implement these methods. We directly create the object. We are directly going to use this methods. We are going to use repository interface and we are going to call the method. When we create the repository interface, JPA will provide the implementation for that interface in the runtime. Proxy class means which will be created in the runtime. Proxy class means which is creating in the runtime. So that is a dummy class. Are you guys clear with the JPA terminology? First one is data source object. Second one is entity class. And third one is repository interface. And the fourth one, repository methods. Along with this, we need to understand some ORM properties also. We are going to configure some ORM properties. We are going to configure some ORM properties. Okay. So ORM properties to automate some configurations. To automate some configurations, we are going to use this ORM properties. To automate some configurations, ORM properties will be available. To automate some configurations here, ORM properties will be available. So what are those ORM properties here, guys? First thing is auto DDL. Okay. If tables are not available, tables should be created. Dynamic schema generation. Dynamic schema generation is one of the property that we can configure in the data JPA, auto DDL. And the second property, show SQL. So display queries on the console. Display generated queries on the console. So like this, we are going to use this. Like this, we are going to use auto DDL and show SQL properties. So these are called as ORM properties. These are called as ORM properties. So what is the purpose of ORM properties? Which are used to automate some configurations that are required in our application. These are some configurations which are required in our application. Are you guys getting my point? ORM properties. So my table is not available in the database. I want to create the table. My table is not available in the database. I want to create the table. My table is not available in the database. I want to create the table. Are you getting my point? My table is not available in the database. I want to create the table in the database. Okay. So to create the table in the database, we are going to use auto DDL. Come on, guys. Are you guys getting my point? Are you clear? Yes, auto DDL tables creation, tables deletion also can be done. Auto DDL having some values, create, delete options are available. So we can delete the tables also. We can create the tables also in the database dynamically. Show SQL. So as we are using the methods, here, those methods will generate some queries internally. Those queries we can print on the console. Got it? ORM properties to automate some configurations. Auto DDL, dynamic schema generation, show SQL, display generated queries on the console. Good. Guys, now you got the clarity. What is the data JPA? Why we are going to learn this data JPA? What we are going to develop by using data JPA? Can we develop a web application by using data JPA? Come on, guys. Persistence logic. The logic which is responsible to communicate with the database, that is called as persistence logic. The logic which is responsible to communicate with the database, that is called as persistence logic. Any logic that we are using to communicate with the database, that logic is called as persistence logic. Are you guys getting my point? Perfect, guys. So anybody having any questions, you can ask me.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Hi.
Sir, what is composite key and when we use that composite key?
Sir, that if your table is having more than one primary key, then that is called as a composite primary key.
Sir, will you take one example in class?
It will be covered. Today is the first session, right? We'll develop composite primary key application also.
Okay, sir.
Sir,
Yeah.
so this data JPA is only for single entity class, means if a class is having foreign key relationship, then also
Foreign key also we can manage by using that mappings configurations. We can manage that.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, we are not using any Artharet component and Artharet bin kind of things. How Spring know about?
Because we are extending the properties from the JPA repository, right? It is going to scan the classes which are extending the properties from these annotations.
Okay. After that, it will take the parameter student.
Correct.
Okay.
Sir, what's the difference between data JPA and Hibernate, sir? Does data JPA use Hibernate?
Data JPA will internally using Hibernate to provide this ready-made facility.
Okay, but all the methods, the 10 methods which you had mentioned was part of Hibernate only, right? So what?
Those methods also part of the Hibernate, but in the Hibernate, you need to write the logic for session factory, session transactions and all. Here, you no need to do anything. JPA will take care. Just you need to call the methods. That's it. You don't need to implement anything.
Okay, you mean to say session handling had to be done?
Session handling, transaction handling will be taken care by JPA. Directly, you can call these methods to perform the operations.
Okay.
Sir,
Yeah.
cache
So when-
support. cache
When I
support-
develop the first example, then you can get more clarity on that.
Sir, also Spring Data JPA supports cache.
Cache mechanism, yes, it will be there. We can configure that also.
Okay.
Sir, are we going to cover the mappings also?
Yes, sir, we will cover that.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. So
Hello.
yeah, so if I want to insert the ID in the database with a sequence, so what annotations we have used in the Spring Boot in JPA?
Generated value annotation is available. We will discuss in the generators concept. When I explain primary keys, I will tell you that part.
Ashok sir, in database we have normalization. Can we do such thing here also?
Yes, you can do that. We can use the annotations. We can do that part as well.
Okay, okay.
Sir, are you going to show any examples for all these methods?
Yeah, that is what today is just introduction part, man. From tomorrow, we are going to work on these methods.
Okay, and
need-
without, yes, ID is mandatory because without ID, it is.
Yeah, whenever we are using any ORM framework, right?
Okay.
Primary key is mandatory for the table. Otherwise, ORM frameworks cannot perform operations.
Okay, okay. And also for CRUD operations, normal operation, we don't to avoid unnecessary pagination or sorting implementation, we can go for CRUD repository, right? For performance.
Correct.
Okay, and one more question, sir. Find by ID and exist by ID, what is the difference?
Find by ID will retrieve the record. Exist by ID will just tell you record is available or not. That's it.
So only Boolean it will return.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so will you cover the connection pooling configuration also?
Connection pool we will be covering. Connection pool will be taken care by data JPA internally. I will show you that also.
Okay, sir, thank you.
Sir, data JPA, was it part of Spring framework earlier, sir?
It is separate module in the Spring Data JPA. How Spring WebMVC available, how Spring ORM available. Similarly, Spring Data JPA is one module in that.
Okay.
Sir, as you said that JPA repository is an interface and the methods which you have told, all the methods are in it. So who is providing the implementation?
Data JPA will provide implementation in the runtime. That is what I have given the point here also. For our repository interface, implementation will be provided in the runtime using proxy class. That will be taken care by Data JPA only. You just need to create a one interface, that's it. You can call the methods, operations will happen by executing the proxy class in the runtime.
But the question is, sir, that supposedly in our process, there is a custom requirement and the CRUD, it's not related to CRUD. Then who will provide the implementation? JPA will only provide the implementation.
JPA will provide. You can write, there is a concept called find by methods, custom queries also we can execute by using JPA. Everything will be covered in this. Today is just introduction. So whatever the doubts that you have on the methods, that you can ask me. How to execute the custom queries, that I am going to cover in the course.
Sir,
JPA will execute the custom queries also.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, we are going to cover DTO classes also, right?
Correct.
Sir,
Yeah.
what is auto DTA? So,
That will create the table. If the table is not available, it will create the table. That is a command which is used to enable dynamic schema generation in the database. You got my point?
Okay, so where we have to write this auto DTA?
The properties file. In the properties file. These are the properties. Properties will be managed by using properties files.
Is there any relation CRUD repository and the JPA repository? Under repository and
Yes, we will understand JPA repository extending the properties from the CRUD repository. We will understand that relation in the coming sessions. As I told you here, with this line that you need to understand, JPA repository is equal to CRUD repository plus extra methods. That means JPA repository extending the properties from the CRUD repository. I will show you that relation.
Yeah, so what major differences in between ORM and the JPA? So like only the sessions and all, or other major differences are
in the Hibernate and all, you need to manage the sessions, you need to manage the transactions, right? In the JPA, you no need to do anything. You just extend the properties from the CRUD repository and call the ready-made methods to perform the DB operations. That's it. You don't need to write any extra logic for that.